The night still holds the room in its quiet embrace when the earliest hint of morning begins to appear. It is not a sharp arrival. It does not break the darkness. Instead, it slides gently into the edges of space, settling between the beams of the ceiling and the uneven surface of the plaster walls. The air is cold in a way that feels familiar, the kind of cold that has lived in the structure of the house for generations. It moves slowly along the floorboards, climbs the walls and lingers in the corners where shadows gather. In the sleeping area, the family lies close together, sharing warmth as naturally as breath. The floor is covered with straw, flattened by many nights of use. Each small movement creates a soft rustling sound, a dry whisper woven into the rhythm of the morning. The straw carries its own scent, a mixture of earth, dust, and the faint memory of summer fields. Over it rests a thin wool blanket, rough to the touch but dependable in its own modest way. It is not meant to chase away the cold completely. It only softens it, making the early hours bearable. The room is narrow, but it feels complete. Bodies curl next to each other, guided by instinct more than thought. Younger children nestle near the center, surrounded by older siblings, whose steady breathing creates a sense of calm that fills the dim space. A small cat is curled at someone's feet, its fur rising and falling softly with each quiet breath. The cold does not trouble it. It has learned to find warmth where the family gathers, becoming part of this nightly cluster without needing invitation. Privacy does not exist here. It is not missed because no one has ever known it. Life is lived together, sleeping, waking, resting, working. Everything unfolds within the same shared walls, and the closeness itself becomes a kind of comfort. The room holds memories of countless mornings just like this one, each identical in shape, yet quietly distinct in the way breath fills the air and settles again. A faint pale light begins to press against the edges of the small window. The glass, uneven and slightly clouded from age, allows only a softened version of dawn to enter. The beam of light does not warm the room, it only reveals it. The outlines of baskets, wooden stools, and folded garments slowly emerge, their details taking shape without urgency. The shadows stretch, settle, then adjust to the quiet expansion of morning. One person stirs first, perhaps an older child, perhaps someone who simply feels the cold more sharply today. The movement is slow, a gentle shift beneath the blanket, a slight crunch of straw. The waking is not driven by a sound or a thought, but by the natural rhythm that has guided mornings for centuries. There is no rush, no moment of decision. The day begins the way it always has, gradually, without force. A breath becomes deeper. A shoulder shifts. A pair of eyes opens to the dimness, adjusting to the faint grey light that now rests upon the walls. The cold touches skin, but the body accepts it easily. It has learned its place in the cycle of seasons long before the mind learned any words to describe them. This kind of waking is gentle, steady, and entirely free from expectation. The first person to sit up does so slowly. The blanket slides away in a soft fold. The cold, heavier near the floor, greets bare feet as they touch the wooden boards. The chill is sharp but familiar, like a piece of the world that returns every morning to remind the body where it belongs. There is no sharp inhale, no reaction of surprise. Only acceptance, quiet and complete. Movement through the room happens without speaking. The path is known even in low light. A hand reaches for balance against the wall. A quiet exhale leaves a faint cloud in the cold air, drifting briefly before disappearing. The rest of the family continues to sleep, their breath forming a slow, collective rhythm that fills the narrow space. Outside, the world is just beginning to lighten. Inside, nothing disrupts the calm. The waking body moves softly, careful not to disturb the others, though the room is so small that every step is naturally close to someone else. The day ahead carries its own tasks, but this moment holds no pressure. It is simply the first stillness of morning, the bridge between sleep and waking. The light grows a little more, brushing across the straw bed, touching the outlines of faces still turned toward dreams. The family remains gathered, connected by warmth and by the unspoken understanding that life here moves at a slow, steady pace. And as the first body settles into the quiet of morning, the day begins not with action, but with calm acceptance. Morning unfolds in the quiet interior of the medieval house with the same slow certainty that shaped every day before it. After the first gentle stirring inside the shared sleeping space, the world beyond the blankets begins to take its form. The cold still lingers on the floor, stretching in thin currents that drift across the boards, but it no longer feels as heavy as it did during the night. The room breathes with the soft movements of the first person who has risen, and soon the faint sounds of the household begin to emerge. Beyond the doorway, the hearth waits in its corner, dark and cool. The ashes from the night fire lie scattered and pale, dusting the stones in a fine grey layer. This hearth is the centre of the home, its warmth, its gathering point, the place where work and rest converge with a quiet regularity. Long before the morning light becomes strong enough to fill the house, it is the fire that signals the true beginning of the day. Someone steps into the hearth room, usually an older woman or the mother of the household. Her movements are slow, steady, and practiced. She does not need to see clearly. Her hands know exactly where to reach. A piece of tinder is gathered, then another. Thin twigs dried during the previous summer are placed carefully around the remains of last night's embers. The faint scent of old smoke rises when her fingers shift the ashes, revealing a few darker coals that still hold a hint of life. A breath is drawn in quietly, then released in a gentle stream over the kindling. The sound is soft, barely more than a whisper. A spark glows, then fades. Another breath follows, patient and unhurried. After a moment, a thin thread of orange light appears beneath the twigs. It flickers weakly, then steadies as more air is coaxed into it. When the flame finally catches, it grows in a controlled, deliberate way, illuminating the woman's hands first, then the rough stones of the hearth, then the immediate space around her. The warmth that begins to radiate from the fire is faint at first, no more than a suggestion. But in a room where cold has settled in every corner, even this small change feels like a quiet promise. The fire snaps softly as the twigs burn down, creating a scattered rhythm of tiny sparks. A larger log is added, placed at an angle to allow the flame to climb. It will burn slowly, carrying its heat outward across the morning. As the fire strengthens, the room around it begins to reveal itself. Wooden bowls sit stacked one inside another along a shelf that has leaned slightly forward with age. Clay jugs, some chipped around the rim, rest near the wall where shadows still gather. A grinding stone waits near the doorway, coated with the fine dust of yesterday's work. Nothing here is new, everything shows signs of long use, but nothing feels worn out. These objects belong to the family the same way the walls and beams do, shaped by time, but still serving their daily purpose. The house is small, and the light traveling through it moves in thin, quiet paths. Morning's first illumination filters in through cracks in the door, and the small window mixing with the orange glow of the hearth. The colors blend softly, grey, gold, pale brown, forming a muted landscape of household life. The light touches the woven baskets first, then the tools on the peg, then the worn wooden stools positioned near the wall. Each object emerges slowly, as if waking at its own pace. The sounds inside the house remain gentle. A few footsteps shift across the floor, never heavy enough to disturb the still atmosphere. The fire gives off an occasional crackle as the log adjusts to the heat. The grinding stone has not yet begun to work, but the memory of its steady scraping noise seems to linger in the room as an echo from the days before. It is a sound that will return soon, another piece of the household rhythm. While the mother tends the fire, another part of the morning begins nearby. A girl, not yet grown but old enough to understand her place in the flow of daily tasks, moves toward the table. Her hair is uncombed, falling loosely around her shoulders. Her feet are bare, chilled by the floor, but she does not pause. Her hands reach for the bowl that holds a small portion of yesterday's flour. The bowl is cool and smooth, made from wood, polished by years of handling. She pulls it closer and sets it on the table without making a sound. The dough she prepares is simple: a handful of flour, a little water, a pinch of salt, kept in a tightly sealed pouch. She mixes them with steady, practiced motions. The dough clings to her fingers at first, soft and uneven, but she continues to fold it until it becomes smooth enough to form. The table beneath her hands carries faint marks of knife strokes and kneading from many mornings like this one. It is the kind of surface that remembers work without resisting it. The girl's movements are slow, not because she lacks skill, but because mornings are meant to unfold without haste. The house has not yet gathered momentum, it is still stretching awake. She kneads the dough carefully until it forms a small, round shape that rests quietly in the bowl. Later, when the fire grows stronger, it will be flattened and warmed on a stone near the hearth. For now, it waits. As she finishes, the younger children begin to stir in the sleeping room. Their footsteps are softer, less certain. They rub their eyes and move toward the hearth, drawn instinctively to the growing warmth. The fire's glow touches their faces, giving them a calm, drowsy brightness as they sit close to the woman who lit it. No one speaks, there is no need. The morning communicates through movement, breath, and the steady expansion of heat through the house. Near the wall, a small spindle rests. It will be taken up soon, perhaps by the same girl who kneaded the dough, or by an older sister who has already learned its rhythm. The spindle is smooth and balanced, its shape designed to turn slowly between skilled fingers. Nearby, a basket filled with wool waits in soft piles, each tuft ready to be teased apart and spun into thread. This is a task learned not through explanation, but through repetition. A child watches her mother or sister do it each day until the motion becomes part of her own hands. Another child may pick up the small wooden tool used to mend clothing, pushing the needle through fabric that has thinned with use. She may not sew quickly, but she sews with the quiet confidence of someone carrying a tradition rather than performing a task. These activities are not assigned or questioned. They are simply absorbed through living, passed down in a way that feels closer to breathing than teaching. Inside this house, morning is not a moment. It is a slow expansion. The fire grows, light spreads, dough rests, tools wait. The children move gently into wakefulness. And through it all, the presence of the family fills the space in a way that is neither loud nor heavy. It is warm, steady, and continuous, like the rise of day itself. As the warmth from the hearth finally reaches the far corners of the room, the house becomes fully awake. But even then, there is no rush. The morning's work will come, and with it, the longer rhythm of the day. For now, the house simply breathes, holding everyone inside its quiet, familiar embrace. The morning settles more fully into the house as warmth begins to spread from the hearth and the light grows steadier across the walls. Outside, the air remains cold and the fields are still covered in a thin layer of pale mist, but inside the day has already found its gentle rhythm. The first tasks of the morning unfold quietly, guided by habits passed through many generations. Among these tasks, the work of wool and thread begins, delicate, steady work that shapes the entire routine of the household. Near the window, where the light becomes stronger first, a basket is set on the floor. It is filled with wool gathered from the previous season, cleaned and stored carefully so that it stays dry and soft. The wool has a faint scent of lanolin and grasses, a reminder of the sheep that once grazed on the hillside beyond the village. A woman pulls the basket closer, places it beside her wooden stool, and settles in with slow, practiced movements. The day is still young, so there is no reason to hurry. The work ahead is long and patient, carried out in the same way it has been for every woman in her family before her. She lifts a handful of wool, letting it open slightly in her hands. The fibers cling together at first, but with gentle pulling they loosen, becoming airy and light. This is the beginning of carding, the process that helps the strands align. She reaches for the wooden carders, two flat pieces of wood fitted with rows of small metal teeth. Their surfaces are worn smooth from years of use, edges rounded by the touch of many hands. Placing the wool between them, she draws the carders apart, and then together again in a calm, repetitive motion. The sound is soft, almost like a whisper, a steady scraping of fibers being teased and straightened. Bit by bit, the wool becomes fluffier, more uniform, free of the small knots and debris that cling to it after shearing. She continues, stroke after stroke, until she has transformed several handfuls into a neat pile of carded wool. The motion requires strength, but not force, precision, but not speed. It is a movement learned in childhood, absorbed through watching mothers, aunts, and older sisters, until the hands themselves understand what to do without needing direction. Once enough wool has been prepared, she sets aside the carders and reaches for the spindle. The spindle is a slender piece of wood weighted with a rounded whirl at the bottom, its shape built to spin smoothly. She lifts it with familiarity, holding the top between her fingers as she twists a strand of wool into a narrow point. Then with a gentle flick, she sets the spindle in motion. It turns slowly, pulling the wool into a thin, strong thread. As the spindle spins, her other hand guides the fibers, drawing them out in a long, continuous line. The thread gathers around the spindle in even layers. Whenever the spindle slows, she flicks it again, maintaining the smooth, steady rotation. There is no rush in this process. The thread must be even, not quick. Each inch must match the one before it. Her hands do not hesitate, nor do they strain. They move with the certainty that comes from years of repetition, shaping wool into the thread that will eventually become cloth. Around her, the house remains quiet. The children have moved outside or toward other chores, and the hum of the spindle fills the space with a rhythmic calm. Occasionally, the thread breaks and she simply starts again, twisting and guiding until it flows smoothly once more. Broken threads are a normal part of the morning. tiny interruptions that require only patience and attention. Her hands show the small marks of this work, the dryness from the fibers, the tiny cuts from the spindle's sharp edges, the worn nails from long days spent pulling, twisting, and guiding. She does not think about them. They are part of the work, part of the life carried quietly from season to season. The women around her, whether in this house or in houses nearby, carry the same small signs on their hands, marks of skill rather than hardship. When enough thread has been spun, she sets the spindle aside and moves toward the wooden loom. The loom takes up an entire corner of the room, its beams sturdy and dark from age. Stringing the loom is careful work, requiring both attention and memory. She loops the threads through the heddles, pulls them taut, and ties them securely. Each thread must be placed correctly, or the pattern of the cloth will shift. Once everything is aligned, she settles herself before the loom and begins the slow, repeating motion of weaving. The shuttle glides between the threads, pulled by her hand and caught by the other. She presses the beater forward, tightening the new row of weaving into the growing cloth. The sound is steady and warm, wood tapping softly against wood, thread brushing against thread. Each pass of the shuttle adds another narrow line to the fabric, building up the cloth one patient moment at a time. As she works, others in the house turn to their own tasks. A young girl gathers herbs near the doorway, sorting them into small bundles that will later be hung to dry. These herbs will flavor food, soothe aches, or become part of the household's remedies. Another woman prepares tallow, melting the hardened fat in a pot that hangs above the fire. It will be poured into small molds to make candles, short, stubby candles that burn quickly but steadily, enough to provide evening light for another day. In the corner of the room, someone examines a piece of cloth already woven. It will soon be cut and shaped into simple garments, mended where needed, or traded at the next market. The cloth carries the subtle irregularities of handmade work, but also the balanced tension of practiced weaving. It is valued for its durability, its warmth, and the reputation of the woman who produced it. In this village, skill in weaving or spinning can be as important as any physical possession. A woman's craft is her identity, her contribution to the household, and sometimes her only form of independence. Near the hearth, preparations for dyeing begin. The dye pot, darkened from years of use, is filled halfway with water. Herbs, roots, or crushed berries are added depending on the color needed. The pot is placed over a steady flame, not too hot, not too cool. Dyeing requires a careful balance of heat and time. If the water boils too fiercely, the dye becomes uneven. If it is too cool, the fibers will not take the color. When the mixture begins to release its aroma, the woman stirs it with a wooden rod, watching the liquid shift from pale to rich tones. A skein of wool is tied loosely to keep the strands together. She lowers it into the pot slowly, letting the fibers absorb the color. The process is slow and she does not disturb it more than needed. The wool must steep gently, allowing the dye to settle evenly through every strand. Later, the wool will be lifted out and hung in the open air to dry, its colors deepened by sunlight and wind. The morning continues like this. Quiet movements, steady breaths, work shaped by the patient rhythm of hands knowing exactly what to do. Nothing is rushed, nothing is forced. Threads grow longer, cloth grows thicker, the dye deepens, the house fills with the soft sounds of craft. The spindles hum, the looms tap, the fires crackle, the faint rustle of drying herbs. And through all of it, the women remain calm and focused, their presence shaping the morning as naturally as light fills the room. Morning has softened into midday softness by the time the work inside the house reaches its comfortable rhythm. The air is warmer now, shaped by the steady breath of the hearth and the movement of bodies passing through the narrow rooms. Outside, the village has awakened fully. Paths between houses carry the gentle traffic of feet, voices, animals, and the familiar sounds of work repeating itself across every household. In this world, where daily labor weaves the structure of life, another thread is woven just as carefully, one that cannot be held or touched, but is felt in every step, every gesture, and every exchange. This is reputation, the quiet currency that shapes a woman's life as surely as any craft she practices. Reputation is not spoken about often, yet it is always present, moving alongside her like a shadow that lengthens or shrinks depending on the light. It grows in small increments, built from countless moments that never announce themselves, the way she carries a basket to the well, the patience in her voice when she speaks to a neighbor, the steadiness of her hands in the market when she measures cloth or hands over a coin. These are not dramatic acts. They are the quiet pieces of life that collect meaning over time. In a village where families remain for generations, reputation is something inherited as much as earned. A woman steps into the world shaped partly by her own mother's name, her grandmother's memory, the way their lives touched others through kindness, skill, reliability, or restraint. And she, in turn, tends to her own reputation with the same gentle consistency that she gives to her wool, her looms, or her household chores. It is not a burden. It is simply part of the world she lives in, as natural as the change of seasons or the rhythm of the spinning wheel. She learns early that the way she moves through the village leaves traces, quiet impressions that settle into the thoughts of those who watch without judgment, simply observing as people in small communities always do. When she walks through the village, she steps lightly on the packed earth pathways, not out of fear, but from a habit formed by generations of women before her. She moves with an ease that keeps her presence soft and unobtrusive. Greetings are exchanged in voices barely above a murmur, with nods that feel almost like breaths, brief, warm, and sufficient. The village is small enough that everyone knows everyone else, so a conversation does not need to be loud to be understood. Words travel even when unspoken. At the well, where women gather with their buckets and pitchers, she listens more than she talks. Conversations drift between chores, children, weather, or the progress of a neighbor's weaving. Nothing urgent, nothing sharp. Just the gentle weaving of community. Her silence is not distance. It is attentiveness, an awareness of the world around her, shaped through listening rather than speaking. In this place, the ability to observe is a skill equal to the ability to craft. Her steps toward the market carry the same quiet care. She moves with measured calm, aware of the eyes that take in small details without meaning to judge. A woman's reputation is built on these details, the steadiness with which she handles her goods, the fairness of her exchanges, the modesty in her demeanor, the way she returns greetings even on rushed mornings. The villagers remember kindness the same way they remember the quality of cloth or the weight of spun wool. The mind collects small impressions and holds on to them, passing them from person to person in a slow, effortless current. Inside the market, she sets down her bundle of cloth and waits for customers. She does not call out to them. There is no need. People know her work. They know her hands produce fabric that is even and strong, threads that do not fray easily, dyes that do not fade too quickly. Skill is part of her reputation, And in a place where goods are precious and time is measured carefully, skill becomes a form of trust. Someone picks up a length of her cloth and examines it quietly. They feel the weight, notice the tightness of the weave, run their fingers along the smooth edge. They nod and the exchange is made. Simple, steady, respectful. Her reputation grows here too in these quiet transactions that ripple outward through the marketplace. It is not only about the quality of what she makes, but the manner in which she interacts. She does not rush customers or boast about her craft. She does not argue loudly when someone offers a price slightly lower than expected. Instead, she considers the offer with the same calmness that she brings to her weaving. If the price is fair, she accepts. If not, she declines with gentle firmness. Such moments reinforce the sense others have of her: balanced, patient, trustworthy. Because the community is small, stories move through it effortlessly. They do not take the shape of gossip unless something unusual occurs. Instead, they drift quietly from mouth to mouth like leaves carried by a slow stream. A woman's reputation is often strengthened or shaped by these drifting words. A neighbor mentioning her fairness in the market. Someone else noting her care for a sick child. A passerby observing the discipline of her work, the way the dye on her yarn is always consistent, or the way she helps an elder carry a heavy bucket from the well. These small observations build something lasting. They create a sense of who she is, even in the minds of people who do not speak to her often. In a small village, awareness is shared and memory is long. This is why reputation is called wealth, because it can support her in times of difficulty, help her daughters when they grow older, or soften the challenges of a poor harvest. It is an invisible thread that binds her to the people around her. Because of this, she carries herself with a balance that feels both natural and intentional. She does not strive to appear perfect. She simply moves with the quiet consistency she learned from the women before her, steps that neither boast nor hide, a voice that rarely reaches above the gentle murmur of daily life. She understands the thin line between humility and confidence, and she walks it with ease. Too much boldness is not valued here, but neither is shrinking. What matters is steadiness, reliability, the gentle predictability of someone who knows her place in the rhythm of community. In the evenings, when she returns home from the market or from visiting a neighbor, she often reflects without words on the interactions of the day. Not through analysis, but through the soft memory of gestures, how someone smiled in greeting, how another paused to admire her cloth, how the conversations at the well carried their usual measured warmth. These impressions settle inside her, leaving a sense of belonging that does not need to be spoken aloud. The community she lives in is woven tightly, like the threads of her loom. Each person is connected to others through work, through proximity, through shared history. There is comfort in this closeness, but it also means that every action, even the smallest one, becomes part of the shared memory. She accepts this because it is the way her world has always been. And because she moves gently within it, her presence becomes one of those quiet anchors the village rests upon. When she walks home, the path is lined with small details, footprints in soft earth, the familiar shape of a neighbor's door, the distant bleating of goats returning from pasture. These sounds and sights absorb the day without adding weight to it. Her reputation walks with her, unforced, simply formed by the way she lives each moment. By the time she steps back into her home and sits near the fire, her day has added another thin layer to the story others hold of her. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just the soft accumulation of trust, grace, and steady presence. In the world she inhabits, this is the greatest wealth she can hold. It is not kept in a box or woven into cloth. It is carried in her posture, her gestures, her voice, and her patience. And as the evening light fades, her reputation settles quietly around her, as soft and constant as the glow from the hearth. The sun has climbed gently above the low roofs of the village by the time she and her mother begin the walk toward the market. The earth beneath their feet is still cool from the night, holding pockets of moisture where the morning dew has not yet lifted. Small stones shift softly under their steps, following their movement with a muted rhythm. Beside them, hedgerows rustle quietly, as the early breeze makes its way through tender leaves and dried stems left from last season. The day is beginning in earnest, but without rush. Everything unfolds in its own unhurried way. As they approach the center of the village, the familiar murmur of the market rises like a tide, soft at first, then fuller, a layered collection of sounds that mingle without overwhelming. It is a soundscape she has known since childhood, one that signals not only commerce but also connection, routine, and the steady weaving of life among neighbors. Markets in this world are less about urgency and more about presence. They draw people out of their homes into a shared space where the day's work becomes communal, where stories drift effortlessly between stalls, and where the rhythms of buying and selling feel as ancient as the soil underfoot. The market sits in an open square bordered by low timber buildings. Their beams, darkened with age, lean slightly inward as though listening to the hum of activity they shelter. The square ground is packed hard from countless footsteps, smooth in some places, grooved in others, shaped slowly by wheels, hooves, and the same repeated pathways taken week after week. At its edges, the soft dust rises in delicate clouds whenever someone brushes past too quickly. But in the center, the surface holds firm, a durable stage for the gentle theater of daily exchange. Stalls line the space, though stalls is a generous word. Most a little more than wooden boards placed across barrels or crates, some covered with cloth to shield goods from the sun, others left bare. A few more established sellers have simple frames of poles and canvas stitched long ago, edges frayed by wind and time. Everything looks practical, built to serve rather than impress. And yet there is beauty in the arrangement, a lived-in beauty, shaped by hands that know their craft and by routines that have repeated themselves for generations. As she steps into the square, the atmosphere embraces her with its quiet density. The sounds settle first, the low murmur of voices, the occasional call of a merchant emphasizing the quality of his goods, the gentle bleating of goats tethered near the far edge where animal sellers gather. Chickens rustle softly in wicker cages. A donkey stamps its hooves against the packed earth, creating a steady thud that blends with the faint clatter of pottery shifting on a nearby table. These sounds do not demand attention, they fade into one another with practiced harmony. Then the scents follow. There is the salt-tinged smell of fish, laid out on cool stones, covered loosely with damp cloth to keep them fresh. Beside it lingers the earthy scent of hides, some newly cleaned, others still bearing faint traces of the animal they once belonged to. The tang of wool hangs in the air too, faint but unmistakable, coming from bales of fleece waiting to be spun or dyed. Nearby, herbs tied in bundles release their fragrance: rosemary, tansy, thyme, and marjoram. Further down, a basket of apples offers a sweet counterpoint, their skins releasing crisp, light perfumes whenever someone brushes past. Her mother moves with familiar ease, weaving through small clusters of people. She greets those she passes with quiet nods and simple, steady words. These greetings are neither rushed nor drawn out. They exist in that particular middle space of community life, warm enough to convey connection, restrained enough to keep the flow of the day intact. The market is not a place for prolonged conversations, though they do happen. More often, it is an exchange of presence. I see you and you see me. Life continues between us. At their usual place along the west side of the square, her mother sets down the bundle she has carried from home. The cloth is wrapped thickly to protect the contents from dust and stray droplets of dew. She unfastens the ties slowly, revealing the folded wool she has woven over the past weeks. The colors are calm, deep russet, soft brown, and a blue so subtle it sits between sky and shadow. The cloth is smooth beneath her fingers, the threads aligned with practiced precision. Each piece represents hours upon hours of work, shearing, washing, carding, spinning, weaving, finishing. Nothing about it was rushed. Once everything is arranged, her mother stands in her steady way, hands resting lightly on the table. She does not call out. She never has. She simply exists in the stall's small space, soft but certain, allowing those who pass to notice the work on their own terms. Some do, some don't. It never changes the calmness of her posture. Selling is part of the day, not a performance. The first customer approaches quietly, an older woman known throughout the village for her careful eye. She greets them with a slow nod, her gaze already moving over the cloth. She touches the edges gently, running her thumb along the weave, feeling for the density that will determine the garment's warmth and longevity. Her hands, worn by years of kneading dough and scrubbing wooden boards, know exactly what they seek. She assesses the cloth without speaking, as is customary. The silence is not awkward. It is the language of the marketplace here. Her mother waits, her own hands resting calmly on one another. After a moment, the older woman gives a small, approving nod and names a price in a voice so soft it nearly blends into the market's background hum. Her mother listens, pauses, then responds with her own quiet offer. The negotiation is gentle, carried out in low murmurs. They come to a shared number with little effort. Coins change hands with the same smoothness as threads changing direction on a loom. The customer folds the cloth carefully, tucking it beneath her arm before slipping back into the current of the market. This is the way exchanges work here. Slow, thoughtful, balanced. Buyers examine, sellers wait. Trust is a soft bridge built not in single moments but across many. A woman's skill is seen in her cloth, but also in the calmness of her conduct. Her mother has learned over the years that nothing in the market needs to be hurried. Every transaction finds its natural pace. Around them, other sellers manage their goods with similar quiet rhythms. A potter arranges bowls in a line, tapping each lightly with his fingernail to test the quality of the firing. A young shepherd adjusts the ropes on a pen of goats, guiding them gently as they shift restlessly. A woman selling herbs ties new bundles while humming softly to herself, her melody lost beneath the market's collective sounds, but leaving a faint impression of calm. Everything feels connected, separate tasks moving in parallel, woven together by proximity and time. As she watches her mother continue her slow exchanges, she notices how each interaction contains small, significant details. The tilt of a head, the way someone pauses before speaking, the slight narrowing of eyes when assessing weight. These gestures carry information no written measurement could hold. Women in the market do not need scales or detailed calculations. They have learned through years of living, through touch, through repetition, through the intimate relationship between their hands and the materials they work with. She observes her mother lifting a length of cloth slightly, allowing someone to see how it falls. She watches as her mother feels another woman's spindle thread, judging its thickness with a simple glide of her fingers. She sees her mother run a thumb across a woven belt offered by a neighbor, sensing immediately whether the tension was even during weaving. None of these actions look deliberate. They appear effortless, but only because they were learned slowly over time through decades of patient practice. Her mother's understanding of materials, weight, and value is not taught in a school. It comes from an enduring relationship with her craft, a relationship built one small task at a time. The knowledge feels as old as the village itself, passed quietly from one generation to the next, mother to daughter, aunt to niece, neighbor to neighbor. No single moment marks the beginning of learning. Instead, it unfolds gradually in the background of everyday life. As the day moves forward, the market thickens slightly with people. Some come from nearby hamlets carrying baskets filled with what little surplus they can trade. Onions, eggs, dried apple slices, simple tools carved from wood. Others arrive from more distant places, accompanied by the faint dust of the road still clinging to their cloaks. Travelers bring new scents with them, smoke from unfamiliar fires, resin from distant pines, or the faint scent of leather treated in another village's workshop. She notices how these outsiders move differently, more quickly, less accustomed to the gentle pace of this marketplace. They glance around with curiosity, their eyes catching on the woven goods, the pottery, the baskets of herbs. Some buy, others merely look, their presence adding subtle texture to the day. But even with them here, the atmosphere remains steady. Nothing disrupts the slow unfolding of the market's rhythm. At noon, the sunlight softens, settling at an angle that makes the colors of the cloth appear deeper. Shadows grow longer, but stay gentle, like ink brushed lightly across parchment. Her mother pours a small swallow of water from their flask, hands it to her daughter, then takes her turn. They eat a thin slice of bread and cheese together. It is not a meal to linger over, but one that fits comfortably within the market's quiet flow. People pass by as they eat, some pausing to admire the cloth, others simply nodding in acknowledgement. There is no separation between rest and work. They coexist quietly. After eating, her mother resumes her place at the stall. More exchanges follow. A woman trades a length of flax thread for a small square of finished wool. Another offers dried beans in place of coin. The market allows for such exchanges gracefully. Not everyone has money, but everyone has something: goods, skills, time. Trade here is adaptable, shaped gently by need. Through it all, the girl observes how the market becomes a subtle classroom. Every moment teaches her something new: how to recognize good wool by sight alone, how to judge whether a spindle has been spun too tightly, how to fold cloth so its edges remain protected, how to sense when a customer wants space before deciding. These lessons come without instruction, absorbed slowly through the body rather than the mind. Her mother occasionally speaks to her in low tones, explaining why a certain wool costs more, or why some dyes hold better than others. She shows how the faint stiffness of a newly dyed piece reveals whether it has been rinsed thoroughly. She presses her daughter's hand against the cloth to feel the tension in the weave. These explanations are calm, unhurried. Each small teaching moment lands gently, settling into memory like a soft grain of sand, joining thousands already there. As the afternoon drifts toward evening, the market begins to thin. Sellers pack their goods slowly. A few lingering customers finish their transactions before slipping away. The sounds soften into a low hum. The shadows stretch longer across the square, blending gently with the features of the stalls until everything feels muted. Her mother folds the remaining cloth with the same careful precision she used to display it. Nothing is rushed. Even after hours of work, the pace remains steady. They wrap the fabric in protective layers and tie it securely. Their stall, once part of the bustling center of the marketplace, now becomes an empty space once more. The table is cleared. The barrels stand quiet. The square exhales. As they walk home, the air carries a different tone. The sun sits lower, its warmth fading into a mild chill that spreads between the trees. The quiet of the path feels fuller after the day's gentle noise. Their steps fall in soft synchronicity over the familiar earth. Her mother carries the pouch of coins close to her side. Its weight is small but meaningful, not wealth, but evidence of a day well spent, a day shaped by skill, patience, and quiet interaction. Some coins will go toward salt, some toward thread. Some will simply wait for future needs. Nothing is wasted. By the time they reach home, the light has deepened into the soft color of dusk. Smoke rises from scattered chimneys across the village, drifting upward in delicate spirals. The door creaks softly as they step inside. The house welcomes them with the quiet scent of warm stone and lingering firewood. The day settles into memory with the same calmness that marked each moment. The market, with its sounds, its scents, and its gentle exchanges, fades into the background of the evening. Yet it remains the steady center of their world, the place where goods move, where information travels, where knowledge grows, and where reputation is shaped by countless small gestures. It is not simply a place of trade, it is the subtle heart of daily life. And tomorrow, or next week, or the week after, the rhythm will repeat. Slow, familiar, steady, always there like the thread running through every woven cloth her mother makes. Morning has settled fully into the day, and the hum of the market still lingers faintly in her memory as she returns home with her mother. But once the door closes behind them and the soft dimness of the house surrounds them again, another rhythm takes its place, one that exists not in the village square, but within the quiet walls of the household. Here, every object, every tool, every small possession carries a value beyond what it appears to be. In a world where buying is rare, where coins travel slowly from hand to hand, the household survives through the soft precision of care, reuse, and the patience to repair what time wears down. This is the heart of a self-sufficient life, shaped largely by the hands of women. Inside the house, she moves through the narrow space with awareness of how everything belongs to something else. A wooden ladle rests by the hearth, its handle worn but still sturdy. A clay bowl sits on a low shelf, its rim chipped from many years of use. A small basket, woven from thin reeds, holds dried beans. Nothing looks new, but everything works. The family owns only what they need, and even those items are treated with gentle attentiveness. In this world, an object is never just an object. It is time, labor, and memory woven together. A piece of cloth folded on the table carries the weight of weeks spent spinning and weaving. A single broken thread would not ruin it, but too many would. She traces the edges lightly, remembering how each thread traveled through the spindle, how each pattern grew through the loom. To her, the cloth is not a simple possession, it is a piece of the household's stability. It will become a garment, or a blanket, or something traded for salt or grain. It carries purpose in its very weave. Nearby, a needle lies on the table, a thin sliver of metal shaped carefully by a blacksmith in a distant village. Needles are precious. Losing one means losing the ability to mend clothing, shape fabric, and preserve garments for another season. When her mother uses the needle, she handles it with the same calm respect she gives to the fire. These small tools hold the rhythm of survival. Without them, the household would feel the absence sharply. Even the broom leaning against the wall holds value. Its bristles are tied tightly in several places to keep them from loosening. When the ends wear down, the broom is not thrown away. Instead, its head is reshaped, or a new bundle of twigs is bound around the handle. Nothing in the house disappears easily. Everything remains a little longer, carried into the next season, the next year, the next memory. She has grown up watching these tasks unfold. She has learned that self-sufficiency does not come from having more, but from maintaining what already exists. The philosophy is simple but deeply rooted. Keep what works, fix what breaks, and use all things fully. Waste is not shameful. It is simply unrealistic. In a life shaped by fields, seasons, and fragile resources, nothing can be taken for granted. At the table, her mother sits with a basket of garments that have thinned with wear. The fabric is soft from repeated washing, edges fraying, seams loosening from long days of movement. The girl sits beside her, holding a spool of thread already prepared from the morning's spinning. Her mother threads the needle with slow precision, pulling the thin strand through the metal eye, smoothing it with a gentle pinch of her fingers. She folds the garment carefully, finding the section where the fabric has begun to tear. With small, even stitches, she begins to bring it back to life. The sound of mending is soft, just the faint slide of thread through cloth. The girl watches her mother's hands move with a steadiness that seems almost meditative. Her mother's breathing falls into the rhythm of the stitches, unhurried, smooth, steady. Each small loop closes a weakness in the garment, restoring it without trying to hide the fact that it has been worn. These repairs do not aim to erase time, they simply allow the object to continue serving. The girl takes up another garment, an older tunic, with a loose seam along the sleeve. Her stitches are slower, less certain, but she works with commitment. Each attempt brings her closer to understanding how fabric moves, how tension shapes the line of repair, how thread must follow the cloth structure rather than fight it. Her mother glances over occasionally, offering quiet guidance, with a tilt of her chin or a gentle touch on the cloth. There is no need for words. The work teaches by doing. Elsewhere in the house, a basket is ready for repair. Its bottom has started to sag from holding grain through many months. She sits beside it, running her fingers along the worn reeds. She replaces the broken pieces with new strips soaked in water to make them pliable. The basket slowly regains its strength with each replacement, gaining years of use from just a few moments of care. When she finishes, the basket looks a little different, patched in places but sturdy, another small victory for the household. The same quiet attentiveness extends to the tools outside. The wooden yoke used for carrying pails is checked regularly for cracks. The rope used for tying bundles is twisted tightly whenever it begins to loosen. The handle of the small hoe is sanded smooth whenever splinters appear. These small acts of maintenance are invisible during the day, but they prevent hardship from arriving suddenly. Each repair is a promise to the next morning, a gesture toward tomorrow's stability. Her mother has told her many times, not as a lesson but as a passing thought, that breaking something is not simply losing a tool. It is interrupting the flow of the household. A chipped pot means meals must change. A torn blanket means warmth must be shared more carefully. A broken basket means the grain must find a new place to rest. In a world where every object is connected to something else, a break rarely stands alone. It ripples outward in small but steady waves. This is why the women in the house move with such gentle awareness of their surroundings. They do not walk quickly through narrow spaces. They do not toss tools into corners. They set things down carefully, knowing how long each item must last. They understand the invisible weight of responsibility carried by a bowl, a cloth, a pot, a needle. Their care is not anxious. It is simply part of how they inhabit their world. Alongside repair and preservation comes another quiet responsibility: managing the household's resources. Her mother keeps track of food with an instinctive sense of balance. She knows how much grain remains in the wooden bin, how many turnips are stored beneath the floorboards, how many jars of dried herbs hang from the rafters. She touches the containers, lifting each one with a practiced motion that tells her exactly how long it will last. This awareness is constant, woven into every day. Water is considered carefully too. The girl helps carry it from the well, feeling the weight of the buckets pull at her arms. They return with calm, careful steps, never spilling more than a few drops. Water is not scarce, but it requires effort. Every cup used in washing or cooking has been carried in her own hands or her mother's. She grows up understanding that what enters the house must be earned through movement, breath, and balance. Wood for the fire is another quiet responsibility. Her mother judges how much is needed to warm the house, cook food, and heat water for washing. They gather wood from the forest edges, stacking it in neat piles outside the door. The girl learns to choose pieces that are dry, those that burn steadily rather than smoke. She listens to the crackle of a good log, the softer whisper of smaller branches catching flame. The fire becomes its own silent teacher. Caring for the animals is part of this quiet economy too. The chickens must be fed and their eggs collected gently, avoiding cracks. A small goat, kept for milk, requires steady handling, patience, and the ability to sense when something is wrong. These tasks do not take place with loud instruction. They unfold softly, shaped by routine and observation. And then there is the awareness of weather, a skill that seems almost instinctive among the older women. They feel the shift in wind, notice the color of clouds, listen to distant sounds that carry through the valley. These small details guide decisions, whether to wash clothes today or tomorrow, whether to bring herbs inside at dusk, whether to prepare more wood for an approaching cold night. The girl watches her mother lean slightly toward the window, reading the day through its gestures. She begins to understand that survival is not only skill, but sensitivity to the world beyond the door. Through all of this, the self-sufficient household feels calm, steady, and self-contained. It breathes with the rhythm of tasks that repeat without losing their meaning. Every repaired basket, every mended garment, every saved piece of wood strengthens the thin layer of security that protects the family from uncertainty. The girl moves through this world with growing familiarity. She recognizes the softness of worn fabric, the reliable shape of well-used tools, the balance of baskets patched many times. She knows how each object has its own place in the flow of the household. And though she does not think of it in words, she senses how the quiet diligence of women keeps everything moving, smoothly, gently, without interruption. The self-sufficient life is not dramatic, it is not loud, It expresses itself in the steady stitching of a seam, the measured tie of a rope, the careful folding of cloth, the subtle attention given to weather, food, warmth, and small repairs. It is a world sustained by hands that understand the value of what they hold. And as evening begins to soften the edges of the day, the house settles into the peace created by these countless small acts. The tools rest, the garments fold neatly, the baskets stand ready. Everything returns to its quiet place, prepared for the next morning. In this world, where so little is wasted and so much is cherished, life flows gently, kept alive by the quiet skill of women whose work is woven into every object that surrounds them. Morning spreads gently across the landscape, and with it comes the quiet reminder that not all women in the medieval world lived the same kind of life. The land was wide, and the structures of society divided it into layers as soft and gradual as the shifting colours of dawn. While peasant women moved through small timber houses, weaving warmth and stability from modest materials, noblewomen lived in larger stone homes, filled with echoes that travelled farther and lingered longer. Their worlds were different, though connected by the same passage of seasons and the same steady rhythm of daily work. A noblewoman's home rose firmly above the ground, built with thick limestone walls that held coolness in summer and preserved warmth in winter. The rooms were larger, their ceilings higher, creating spaces where sound floated rather than settled. Tapestries hung from the walls, softening the chill of stone and adding muted colour to the wide halls. These tapestries were not merely decoration, they protected the household from drafts, and each one took months to complete. The threads shimmered faintly in the early light, deep greens, warm reds, muted golds, woven into scenes of hunting, forests, or geometric patterns that suggested order and calm. Furniture in these homes was sturdier, chests carved with careful hands, long tables made from oak, and wooden chairs with backs tall enough to give the body gentle support. The fabrics used inside, curtains, cushions, bed coverings, were woven with more refined thread, smoother beneath the touch, dyed with rare plants that produced deeper blues, richer greens, and softer purples. Where a peasant woman might sleep on straw covered by a thin blanket, a noblewoman often slept on a raised bed with thick woolen covers and linen sheets washed until they softened through years of use. She did not live alone in these large spaces. Around her moved a small constellation of women whose tasks supported the rhythm of the household. A maid who warmed water in large iron cauldrons, another who swept the long corridors, a young girl who helped mend clothes or carried messages between rooms, and sometimes an older, trusted servant who knew the household as well as any member of the family. In this world, a noblewoman rarely performed manual labor alone, yet her days were no less full. Her responsibilities were broad, woven through the fabric of the estate like threads guiding the shape of an entire tapestry. She woke early, often before the sun had fully risen, because the house, with its many rooms and many people, needed its own quiet steward. While servants moved softly through the hallways, tending fires and preparing the morning meal, she began her day by reviewing the tasks she had set aside from yesterday. A noble estate was not just a home, it was a living system. Fields stretched around it, filled with grain, vegetables, and grazing animals. Workshops connected to the house produced candles, tools, and simple cloth. Barns sheltered animals that provided wool, milk, or strength for ploughing. And overseeing all of this, ensuring that the land yielded enough food, that supplies were used wisely, and that the workers received direction, fell partly to her. She began with ledgers, the quiet heart of her administrative work. These were thick books bound in leather, their pages filled with careful handwriting. She kept track of harvests, livestock numbers, grain stores, and the tasks assigned to each household worker. Her handwriting was steady, shaped by years of practice. Numbers and names formed soft rows across the page, creating a slow map of the estate's health. Some mornings, she stood at the window overlooking the courtyard, watching as workers prepared for the day. The stable boys opened the heavy wooden doors to lead the horses out into the yard, their hooves tapping gently against the stones. A servant carried baskets of grain toward the granary, the handles resting firmly in her palms. Another swept the walkway, pushing fallen leaves aside with slow, deliberate strokes. These movements formed a silent reminder of the life she coordinated from the inside. After reviewing her ledgers, she often walked through the house to check on supplies. In the pantry, she lifted the lids from clay jars to assess the amount of flour, salt, dried peas, and herbs. In storerooms, she touched the fabric folded neatly in chests, assessing texture, weight, and readiness for use. If repairs were needed, a curtain fraying, a garment thinning, she set them aside for the sewing room. Sometimes she resumed work on them herself, adding small, precise stitches that aligned with the cloth's grain. Her hands knew the language of thread, even if she no longer spun or wove every day. By mid-morning, she often met with the steward, a quiet man who oversaw the estate's outdoor labor. They spoke about the fields, the condition of the soil, the upcoming harvest, or repairs needed on the barn roof. She listened with the same calm attentiveness she brought to her weaving long ago. Decisions unfolded slowly, shaped by weather, by the season, and by the steady pulse of work that tied the estate together. After their meeting, she turned her attention to the household workers. The women who served the family depended on her direction. One might oversee laundry, an all-day task involving heavy tubs of water, coarse soap, and long lines where garments dried under the sun. Another might tend the kitchen, where vegetables simmered in large pots over steady flames. A younger girl might be responsible for gathering herbs or delivering messages. The noblewoman moved through these spaces with a quiet presence, offering guidance without rush. Her afternoon unfolded in steady stretches of work. Some days, she oversaw the creation of garments for the household. She examined newly delivered fabric, smoothing it with her palm to check for consistency. She measured lengths of cloth against her arm, letting the weight settle into her hand so she could plan where each piece would be used. She supervised cutting, guiding the young maids through gentle gestures, reminding them to keep the lines straight and the edges even. Other days, she reviewed the estate's purchases. Items brought from town, spices, finer cloth, ironwork, were accounted for and stored. She recorded each one in her ledger, noting their cost and their purpose. This slow accounting was her way of ensuring the household never fell into waste or disorder. There were moments of quiet in her day as well, short pauses where she rested her hands on the windowsill and watched the garden move gently in the wind. These moments were not leisure in the modern sense, they were simply part of the rhythm of a life grounded in responsibility. She breathed in the scent of the herbs growing near the wall, listened to the faint echoes of work beyond the courtyard, and let her thoughts flow without urgency. Despite the differences between her world and that of the peasant women, the noblewoman's life shared an underlying thread, the quiet work of maintaining stability. While peasants spun wool into thread and repaired baskets with their own hands, noblewomen coordinated the dozens of tasks that kept their estates thriving. Both forms of labor carried value, both upheld the households they served, and both required a calm understanding of the world around them. As the sun lowered toward the western hills, the noblewoman gathered her ledgers once more. She reviewed what had been completed, what still needed time, and what tasks could wait until the next day. Evening brought a slower pace. Servants lit candles along the corridors, their flames flickering softly against the stone. The noblewoman made her final round through the house, checking that the fires were safely banked for the night, that food was set aside for tomorrow, and that the workers had finished their tasks. Only when the household had settled into evening calm did she return to her room. The stone walls glowed faintly under candlelight, and the woven tapestries softened the coolness that rose from the floor. She sat beside her bed with a deep, measured breath. Not because the day had been overly heavy, but because this moment of stillness was part of her routine. She let the quiet fill the room, carrying no urgency, no expectation. In the world outside her walls, peasant women were finishing their own tasks for the night, mending garments, tending fire, preparing beds filled with straw. Their hands, like hers, moved with a familiarity shaped by years of repetition. Though their surroundings were different, the core of their work connected them. The calm responsibility of ensuring the people around them lived with steadiness and warmth. Class separated their houses, their tools, their responsibilities. But the quiet patience of daily labor, the measured steps, the awareness of each object, the steady arrangement of tasks, belonged to them all. Through these shared rhythms, their worlds, though distinct, touched lightly across distance. And as night settled over fields, villages, and stone estates, both noblewomen and peasant women found themselves easing into the same gentle dark, preparing quietly for another day shaped by the slow, enduring pulse of medieval life. In the slow-moving fabric of medieval life, childhood did not stand apart as a separate world. It blended gently into the flow of daily labor, shaped not by toys or idle hours, but by the soft, steady rhythm of a household that needed every hand, even the smallest ones. A girl born into this world grew up surrounded by the sounds of work, spinning wheels turning, knives slicing vegetables on wooden boards, water sloshing inside clay pitchers, and the familiar creak of floorboards beneath moving feet. These sounds became the first language she understood, a language made of motion rather than words. By the time she reached 4 or 5 years old, she already knew how to move around the house without disrupting the fragile balance that shaped the day. She carried small bundles of herbs to her mother, handed wooden spoons across the room, or helped gather eggs from the hens outside. These were not tasks given to burden her, nor were they marks of duty. They were simply part of growing up in a place where work and life were woven together so tightly they could not be separated. Young children watched everything around them. They learned by seeing how hands moved, how objects were held, how steps were taken. Their minds absorbed the flow of movements long before their bodies could imitate them. A 4-year-old might sit at her mother's feet, tracing the grain of the wooden floor with her fingers, while her mother kneaded dough in a slow, steady rhythm. She did not need to be told what was happening. She knew from countless mornings like this one that dough required patience, that warmth had to be coaxed through it gently, and that a smooth surface came only after many repeated motions. These quiet lessons built the foundation for what she would later do herself. As she grew older, the tasks she helped with expanded naturally. By the age of 7 or 8, she knew how to carry water carefully from the well, holding the bucket close to her body to avoid spilling precious drops. She swept the floors in small, determined strokes, listening to the soft brush of straw against wood. She helped sort beans, lentils, or grains for cooking, learning to distinguish good from bad with a simple touch or glance. These moments were small pieces of practice, quietly preparing her hands for the responsibilities that would come later. By 10 or 12 years old, her role within the household had shifted without ceremony. She no longer watched from the edge of the room. She stood beside her mother, her movements becoming part of the daily rhythm rather than merely echoing it. This age, somewhere between childhood and the beginnings of adolescence, was when learning deepened. Her body had grown steadier, her hands more precise, her awareness of the household more instinctive. The invisible line that separated helping from doing faded entirely. One of her first major skills was spinning. The spindle, light and smooth in her hand, required a calm balance of tension and release. Her mother showed her how to twist the fibers between her fingers, letting the spindle drop gently to pull the wool into a long, even thread. At first, her thread broke often. She restarted quietly, tying the ends together with nimble fingers. In the beginning, the thread wavered between thick and thin, but with practice, it became steadier, matching the evenness of her mother's work. The spindle taught patience before it taught skill, and she learned both slowly, without pressure, simply by doing the task each day. In the kitchen, her hands found new rhythms. She learned how to chop herbs with a dull knife, pressing the blade down carefully so it would not slip. She stirred porridges made from barley or oats, letting them thicken gradually over the fire. She carried small pots of water, poured them into bowls, and wiped the table clean after meals. Each motion built upon the one before it, forming a quiet sequence she rarely thought about consciously. She also learned to care for her younger siblings, guiding them by example. She tied their cloaks before they stepped outside, washed their hands before meals, and soothed their worries with soft words or gentle gestures. Caring for younger children was one of the first responsibilities that taught her how to pace herself, how to listen without interrupting the flow of the household, and how to provide comfort using the same steadiness she saw in her mother every day. In medieval life, there were no notebooks, no diagrams, no written instructions for these tasks. Learning unfolded through observation. The girl watched how her mother angled her hand when she poured water from a clay jug. She noticed how her aunt checked the warmth of bread by touching the crust lightly with her fingertips. She absorbed how her older sister spun the spindle with a flick that kept it turning longer, or how her grandmother plucked feathers cleanly from a chicken with a single practiced gesture. Each detail fed directly into her memory, stored not in lists, but in the physical knowledge of her hands. Often she learned simply by being nearby. If her mother was weaving, the girl sat beside her, listening to the wooden loom creak softly as the shuttle passed between the threads. If her mother embroidered a hem, the girl watched the small needle flash through cloth, leaving calm, even stitches behind. She saw how her mother adjusted tension, pulled thread smoothly, and trimmed edges with quiet precision. When she finally attempted the task herself, her hands moved with surprising familiarity, shaped by years of silent watching. By the time she reached adolescence, her skill set had grown deep and wide, though it had been built in fragments so small she barely felt the transition. She knew how to mend a garment so the seam lay flat, how to light a fire without wasting precious kindling, how to judge the temperature of water by dipping her wrist into it, and how to preserve herbs so their fragrance lasted through winter. She knew how to mix dough for bread, how to shape it into modest loaves, and how to sense when the fire's heat was right for baking. She had also learned the rhythms of the land, how seasons shaped food, how sunlight strengthened dyes, how dampness affected spinning, and how frost signaled the need for thicker layers of wool. These lessons were not taught formally. They were absorbed slowly through years of being outside at dawn, gathering firewood, tending animals, and watching the older women read the day as if it were a familiar text. In the transition toward adulthood, the household entrusted her with more responsibility. She helped prepare meals entirely on her own, stirring pots of stew that simmered through the afternoon. She wove simple bands of cloth used for belts or bindings. She carried heavier baskets. She took part in washing clothes by the river, scrubbing them on smooth stones with a rhythm shaped by the current. By now, her movements possessed a quiet confidence. She knew where the tools were kept, how much food remained in the pantry, what tasks needed to be done next. She began to anticipate what the household required before being asked. If a fire burned low, she added wood. If a garment showed signs of fraying, she set it aside for mending. If rain threatened, she helped bring drying herbs indoors. In this world, adolescence was less about age and more about readiness to take on the work that sustained the family's life. There was no sudden ceremony marking the transition. The girl simply became capable, then dependable, then quietly essential. The tasks she once watched others do now belonged to her hands. And in preparing for adulthood, she gained something deeper than skill. She learned how to exist in a world shaped by steady rhythms rather than sudden changes. She learned how to become part of the household structure, how to hold responsibility softly but firmly, and how to move through each day with awareness of what needed care. Her future, though not yet defined, felt close, woven into the familiar motions she practiced every day. As evening settled over the village, she helped her mother close the shutters against the cooling air. She placed the spindle carefully on the table, folded the cloth she'd been mending, and swept the last bits of flour into a small corner where chickens would peck it up in the morning. The tasks, simple as they seemed, carried her smoothly toward adulthood. They shaped her in ways she barely noticed, forming a quiet foundation for the woman she would become. In this gentle world where learning meant observing and doing, where childhood blended softly into responsibility, a girl grew into her future, the same way thread wove into cloth, quietly, patiently, one motion at a time. The afternoon light softens as it stretches across the village, settling gently on rooftops, fields, and the narrow pathways that weave between small wooden homes. In this quiet world, life is sustained not only by individual households, but by the subtle connections between them. Every woman, every family, every task is part of a network so woven into daily existence that it is almost invisible. Yet it is this network, calm, steady, enduring, that holds the community together through every season, every shortage, and every moment of uncertainty. For women, these connections are lived more than spoken. They unfold in the soft exchanges between houses, in the shared work that drifts quietly from one family to the next, and in the gentle gestures that pass as naturally as breath. A bowl of broth carried to a neighbor, a handful of herbs left by a door, a few strands of wool offered without ceremony, these small acts create a web of interdependence stronger than any written agreement. Each morning, as women move through their tasks, they remain aware of the world outside their door. If smoke rises from a chimney at an unusual hour, they take note. If a door stays closed longer than expected, they listen quietly, for sounds inside. This awareness is not intrusive. It is a soft, protective instinct shared among people whose lives are bound together by necessity and trust. When someone falls ill, the rhythm of the entire community shifts slightly, accommodating the sudden change with remarkable ease. A woman who would normally spend her morning spinning wool may instead prepare a pot of broth and carry it across the village in a wooden bowl wrapped with cloth to preserve its warmth. Another might bring freshly baked bread, still warm from the hearth. Someone else might arrive silently to help tend the fire, sweep the floor, or watch over younger children while the family focuses on care. These gestures are small, almost understated, but they carry an immense weight. No one asks for help directly. The community senses the need through observation. And because everyone understands the fragility of life in a world shaped by weather, harvests, and the unpredictability of illness, they offer assistance without expectation. To help is simply part of belonging. During harvest season, when every pair of hands matters, the flow of support becomes even more visible. Women gather in the fields alongside the men, walking through rows of grain with baskets slung over their arms. They harvest slowly and steadily, their movements guided by the rhythm of the wind brushing through tall stalks. If one family falls behind because of poor health, a new baby, or bad luck with weather, the others step in quietly. They arrive at dawn with extra tools, extra baskets, and a calm sense of purpose. Together, they complete the work before the weather changes or the daylight fades. In return, when the season shifts and another family needs help mending roofs, repairing fences, or preparing wood for winter, the favor flows back naturally without calculation. There is no tallying, no list of debts to be repaid. The village thrives because everyone understands that support is a cycle, not a transaction. What is given today returns in another form tomorrow. Food moves through this network as smoothly as conversation. A woman might bring a few onions to a neighbor whose garden did not fare well that year. Another might share extra milk from her goat, delivered in a small clay jug, wiped clean with linen. When bread comes out of the oven and the scent drifts through the houses, someone sets aside a loaf for a family who needs it more. These gestures are woven into the fabric of life so subtly that they hardly seem like gifts. They are simply the way the community breathes, sharing, supporting, adjusting, and finding balance. News travels through the village with the same gentle flow, not through formal speeches or announcements, but through the quiet exchanges that take place in the market, at the well, or during the daily tasks women do together. While drawing water, one woman might mention that a family at the far edge of the village welcomed a new baby. Another might share that a traveler passed through recently, bringing stories of distant towns or small warnings about weather patterns. These pieces of information scatter like seeds carried from house to house as women go about their chores. None of it is sensational. It is simply the practical knowledge the community needs to stay connected. If a family has lost an animal or if someone is preparing to travel, news helps others know when to offer assistance or watch for signs of trouble. The flow of information here is quiet but constant, moving through the hands and voices of women who keep the village linked in ways deeper than any visible structure. Sometimes these conversations grow into small circles of shared work. If several families need cloth for winter clothing, the women might gather in one house to spin wool together. They sit in a loose ring near the fire, each with her spindle in hand, the fibers stretching between their fingers with slow, familiar rhythm. As they spin, they speak softly about the week's events, the health of a child, the state of the fields, the progress of the season. The room fills with a mixture of spinning, warmth, and quiet companionship. When the wool has been spun, someone distributes it evenly so each family receives what they need. During dyeing season, several women might meet near one house where the dye pot stands over a carefully tended fire. They work in unison, one tending the flame, another stirring the mixture with a wooden staff, another lifting skeins of wool from the pot with slow, steady hands. While they work, they trade the knowledge gathered from their mothers and grandmothers, how to coax deeper colors from the same mixture, how long to soak certain fibers, how to cool the dyed wool properly so the colors stay true. These shared tasks strengthen bonds in ways words alone never could. Children. Absorb these social rhythms as naturally as they learn to walk. The girl from the previous chapter grew up not only learning the motions of household work, but also witnessing the quiet exchanges between families. She watched her mother bring broth to a neighbor, share herbs at the well, or tend another woman's children while she recovered from childbirth. These memories took root as part of her understanding of the world, shaping her sense of community long before she recognized it consciously. As she stepped into adolescence, she began to take part in these exchanges herself. She carried small baskets of dried beans to neighbors who needed them. She helped wash clothes for a woman who had fallen ill. She learned to prepare soft porridge for a child who could not yet chew solid food. These gentle tasks introduced her to the idea that belonging was built through actions as simple as knocking on a neighbor's door with a bowl in hand. Even the simplest gesture, a handful of grain shared after a poor harvest, a piece of cloth traded for no reason other than kindness, helped create a sense of stability. Women understood deeply that survival depended not only on individual effort but on the strength of the whole community. They did not speak of this truth in philosophical terms. They lived it day after day in the way water flows through a channel carved by time. This network of social bonds was especially important during the hardest seasons. In years when harvests were thin or storms damaged the fields, the village tightened itself into a closer weave. Families shared their remaining stores with caution, but without hesitation. Women stretched meals creatively, making broth thinner, bread smaller, or vegetables last longer. These periods revealed how the strength of the community was not in its wealth, but in its willingness to support one another. There was peace in knowing that no one truly faced hardship alone. Even when the days grew darker earlier, or when illness swept through the village slowly, the community remained steady. Women moved through their homes with candles in hand, checking on neighbors with quiet knocks. The warmth of the hearth in each house radiated outward through these visits, creating threads of comfort that connected every person, even in the coldest months. As evening approached, the girl observed how the village settled into its nightly stillness. Doors closed gently. Fires dimmed to soft embers. Children were brought inside, washed and wrapped in woolen blankets. But the ties that shaped the day did not disappear in the dark. They remained like the faint glow of coals under ash, quiet, steady, preserved until morning. And in this steady world where one woman's strength lifted another, and where the smallest gesture could ripple outward like a calm wave, the village found its sense of safety. Not a grand, fortified safety, but a gentle one, built from shared tasks, shared food, shared time, and the unspoken understanding that life here thrived because everyone carried a little piece of everyone else's burden. This was the soul of the community, the silent, enduring bond between women woven through their work, their gestures, and their presence. Through seasons of abundance and seasons of scarcity, these bonds shaped a life where stability emerged not from walls or wealth, but from the quiet, constant compassion of those who lived side by side. The landscape shifts its breath as the year turns, and with each change in weather, the rhythm of village life adjusts gently, as though guided by an unspoken agreement between the land and the people who depend on it. For women, who move through each season with quiet endurance, the relationship with nature is steady and deeply woven into every action. They feel the year not as a set of dates, but as a slow, unfolding cycle. Grain ripening in the fields, winds softening or sharpening, air warming or cooling in a gradual, predictable arc. When harvest season arrives, the village awakens earlier than usual, stirred not by urgency but by the simple knowledge that the coming days will be long. The grain stands tall in the fields, its golden heads bending slightly under their own weight. The first light of dawn touches the edges of the stalks, revealing faint lines of dew that cling to them like threads of clear glass. The air is cool and holds the promise of steady work. Women walk toward the fields in group, their steps falling into an unforced rhythm along the narrow dirt paths. They carry small scythes or sickles with polished handles, worn smooth through years of use. Some have baskets tied at their sides, others bring cloths to lay on the ground for gathering the grain. The scent of earth rises softly around them as they step onto the field. Harvesting begins with calm precision. A woman bends slightly at the waist, gathers a section of stalks with one hand, and cuts them with a clean, practiced motion. The grain falls into her arms with a quiet rustle, settling against the cloth wrapped at her waist. She repeats the movement steadily, her breath matching the rhythm of her body. Around her, other women do the same, forming a wide, gentle sweep across the field. The sound of harvest is soft, an endless whisper of stalks brushing against one another, the faint scrape of metal against plants, the murmur of quiet voices exchanging brief, practical words. No one rushes. The work is too important for haste. Each movement must be deliberate to ensure the grain is cut cleanly and gathered without loss. By midday, bundles of grain lie neatly tied along the edges of the field. The women lift them one by one, placing them on wooden sleds or baskets carried on their backs. Even the carrying follows a serene rhythm: lift, adjust, walk, breathe. They bring the bundles to open spaces where they will dry in the sun, turning them occasionally so that the warmth touches every part. Children help with this task, moving the bundles slowly along the ground, imitating the motions they have watched their mothers perform for years. The entire village participates. In the distance, men stack larger bundles or bind them into high, stable shapes that will withstand wind. But much of the careful handling, sorting, and spreading is done by women, whose patience suits the nature of the task. For hours they continue, letting the sun dry the grain to just the right degree, neither too quickly nor too slowly. If unexpected clouds gather on the horizon, every gesture becomes slightly more focused, though still unhurried. Someone glances toward the sky. Another adjusts the cloth covering a basket. A soft word passes down the line. Rain may be coming. The response is immediate but calm. Bundles are lifted, carried under shelter, or covered with woven mats. Nothing is frantic. The community has seen this shift many times and adapts with the ease of repeated experience. When the rain arrives, it often begins as a mist, drifting lightly over the fields before deepening into a steady fall. Women move beneath the shelter of trees or eaves, their garments damp, but their spirits steady. They wait quietly, listening to the soft patter of drops against leaves and roofs. Rain is not an interruption, it is part of the cycle, a reminder that nature's decisions cannot be controlled, only accommodated. Once the rain passes, the work resumes. The women return to the fields, their tools still in hand, and continue where they left off. If the ground has become too wet in one area, they shift to another. If the bundles need additional drying, they lay them out in places where the wind moves freely. Adaptation is constant but effortless, shaped not by external instruction, but by an understanding that has been passed from mother to daughter for generations. Harvest is only one season among many. In autumn, the air cools and the winds change direction, carrying hints of winter. Women gather apples, pears and nuts, storing them in baskets kept in cool corners of the house. They dry herbs, slice vegetables for winter stews, and preserve berries in jars of thick paste. Their hands work steadily, transforming the excess of the present into security for the months to come. In winter, snow gathers along the rooftops and fields, rest beneath a layer of white. Women move more slowly, conserving energy while tending fires, mending clothes and caring for children indoors. They spin wool near the hearth, their motions measured and soothing, creating thread that will later become warmer garments. The sound of wind outside is constant, but inside the house, life continues in quiet, deliberate patterns. When spring arrives, the world softens once more. Soil loosens underfoot, and the first green shoots break through the earth. Women plant seeds in narrow rows, pressing them gently into the soil with patient fingers. They tend these plants daily, watering, weeding, shaping small channels to guide rainwater where it is most needed. Spring labor is light but constant, a soft promise of future abundance. Summer brings strength to the crops and warmth to the air. Women gather herbs at their peak, drying them in bundles that hang from the rafters. They check the vegetable gardens each morning, harvesting what is ripe and protecting what needs more time. They adapt to heat by adjusting the pace of their work, starting earlier, resting in the shade when the sun rises high, and returning to the fields in the cooler hours of late afternoon. Through all these seasons, adaptation flows like a second language. Women shift their tasks naturally, never fighting nature's decisions. A sudden cold night leads them to cover fragile plants with extra cloth. A dry week sends them walking farther for water. A strong wind teaches them to tie down baskets, pots, and bundles more securely. Every change in weather brings a corresponding change in behavior, and these adjustments are made so gently that they feel almost instinctive. Nothing about medieval life is easy, yet nothing is met with drama. Women do what needs to be done, not out of stoicism or submission, but because the land has taught them how to move in harmony with its moods. Their days flow with the seasons, rising and falling gently, shaped by the quiet logic of survival. As the sun dips behind the hills on a harvest day, the air cools once more. Women walk home slowly, the scent of grain still clinging to their garments. They carry the satisfaction of work completed, knowing tomorrow will bring more tasks but also more chances to adapt, adjust, and continue. The fields behind them rest in the soft glow of evening, rows of cut stalks shimmering faintly under the fading light. The cycle of the year continues, steady, predictable, and vast. And within it, the women of the village move like threads in a larger fabric, their actions gentle but essential. They face nature not with resistance, but with quiet respect, shaping their days around the shifting rhythms of sun, wind, frost, and rain. In this world, adaptation is not an effort. It is a way of living, calm, attentive, and enduring. A soft partnership between human hands and the land that feeds them. As daylight fades from the village and the last traces of warmth slip behind the low hills, the rhythm of life dissolves gently into the quiet of evening. The sky shifts from soft gold to deep blue, then settles into the muted tones of night. Darkness does not arrive abruptly, it folds slowly over the world, settling into the narrow spaces between houses and into the grass flattened by footsteps throughout the day. In this calm descent, the household begins its nightly rituals, steady, deliberate motions that guide everyone toward rest. Inside the house, the first task is always to prepare the space for night. Women gather straw from a corner of the room where new bundles have been stored. The straw rustles softly in their hands, releasing the faint scent of dried fields and long afternoons beneath the sun. They spread it evenly across the sleeping area, replacing pieces flattened from the night before. The floor grows cushioned and warm again, ready to hold the weight of sleeping bodies. Near the hearth, the last embers of the fire glow with a slow pulse, giving off faint warmth. A woman kneels beside them, adding a few small pieces of wood, just enough to keep the glow alive without brightening the room too much. She arranges the wood with practiced care, coaxing the embers into holding their quiet heat through the early part of the night. A soft clink follows as she places the iron tools neatly back against the stones. The door is checked next. A strip of cloth or animal hide is pressed along the edges to lessen the wind that easily slips through small gaps. Cold air still finds its way inside, but the barriers soften its arrival, keeping the night more bearable. Windows, if the house has any, are covered with shutters or extra cloth. The room grows darker, the outlines of objects fading into gentle shapes. Clothing, worn through the day, is lifted from the floor and shaken lightly to remove dust or small bits of straw. Women mend any loose seams or worn patches before folding garments neatly for the next morning. Those that must be dried, aprons damp from washing, cloths used in the kitchen, are hung on wooden poles closer to the hearth, where the faint residual heat will reach them. With the housekeeping tasks done, the room shifts into a different rhythm, one of personal care and soft restoration. A pot of warm water, heated earlier in the evening, sits ready near the hearth. Women and girls take turns dipping small cloths into the water and wringing them out to wipe the day from their skin. The cloths glide across arms, shoulders and necks, lifting away dust and the fine particles of straw that cling to the body after hours of work. Hair is loosened and brushed with gentle fingers. If herbs were gathered earlier, rosemary, chamomile, or lavender, they are steeped briefly in the warm water, creating a subtle fragrance. Women dip their hands into the mixture and run it through their hair, smoothing strands that have grown tangled through wind and movement. The scent is faint, almost weightless, but comforting in its familiarity. The youngest children are cleaned with the same warm cloths, their small limbs washed carefully to remove dirt from play. They breathe softly, growing calmer as the warmth settles into their skin. Someone rubs their feet gently to brush away the dust collected from the floor. Each motion is slow, steady, designed to ease the body toward rest. Once everyone has washed, the pot is carried outside and emptied, its water released quietly into the earth. Inside, garments meant for nighttime, simple, soft tunics, are pulled on, designed not for beauty, but for comfort. Bodies warm quickly beneath the fabric, the lingering heat from the hearth mixing with the warmth stored naturally in the straw bed. Night settles fully now, deep and steady. The darkness inside the house thickens but remains soft, illuminated only by the faint glow from the embers. This dim light casts gentle shadows on the walls, turning the sleeping area into a calm landscape of shapes and contours. Women guide the children to lie down first, letting them nestle close to one another. The rustle of straw accompanies each movement, rising and falling like breath. Unlike modern sleep, the night in this world is not a single, unbroken stretch. Instead, it follows an older rhythm, one of segmented rest. People sleep deeply for a few hours, then wake naturally in the middle of the night, their bodies recognizing this pause as a familiar part of the cycle. They lie quietly at first, adjusting to the coolness of the air and the soft stiffness of their limbs, easing out of sleep. Some remain under the blankets, staring into the dimness with calm, steady breaths. Others rise slowly, careful not to disturb those still resting. A woman might sit near the hearth, coaxing a small flame from the embers with only a few gentle motions. She adds a piece of wood, enough to warm the room without fully lighting it. These nighttime moments hold a quiet intimacy. Families speak in low murmurs, sharing a few gentle words about the day or quietly planning tomorrow's tasks. Children wake briefly and settle again. Women use the time to stretch their hands, sometimes mending a small tear or checking a garment that needs repair. The rest is not rushed. It is a natural pause, a gathering of breath before returning to sleep. Some use the time to step outside, pushing open the door just enough to slip through. The night air greets them coolly. The village is silent, except for the distant call of night birds or the soft rustle of wind through trees. Houses appear as shadowed shapes, their hearths glowing faintly behind shuttered windows. The world feels larger and gentler at this hour, as though the darkness has softened its edges. After this slow interval, sleep returns. People ease themselves back onto the straw bed, letting their bodies settle into familiar places. The room grows quiet once more, the only sound the soft overlapping breaths of those resting side by side. The fire dims again, returning to its slow glow. The second sleep is deeper, heavier, less filled with movement or thought. It carries them through the last hours of night until the first hints of dawn begin to touch the window or the small cracks beneath the door. When morning finally arrives, it unfolds gently, just as the night did, quietly guiding the household from rest back into the steady motion of daily life. In this world, night is not simply darkness. It is a time of slow restoration, soft gestures, and small rituals that gather the scattered pieces of the day and let them settle. It is the rhythm that balances the labor of morning and afternoon, grounding life in a cycle of work and rest that feels as natural as breath. The medieval world settles into its own rhythm, a rhythm shaped not by sudden changes, but by the slow turning of seasons and the steady weight of daily work. Life moves in small adjustments, in subtle transitions from warmth to cold, from planting to harvest, from dawn to the quiet pull of night. Nothing is hurried, nothing demands urgency. The days stretch forward with the calm certainty of a path that has been walked for generations. For the women who carry this world on their shoulders, enough is always the goal. Not abundance, not brilliance, just enough grain to last through winter, enough wool to spin into clothing that will keep the family warm, enough strength in their hands to continue each task without faltering. Their work leaves traces on their bodies, coarse palms from rope and tools, wrists strong from kneading dough, nails marked by dye and earth. These signs are not burdens. They are the natural outcome of a life lived close to the ground, close to the elements, close to the quiet cycles that shape survival. Old garments patched in careful layers, a pot repaired rather than replaced, a spindle worn smooth from years of use. These things speak of durability, of the quiet pride in keeping something alive longer than expected. In the soft lamplight or the faint glow of a hearth, every object holds the memory of hands that shaped it, cleaned it, carried it through the turning of seasons. And behind these rhythms stands the medieval woman, steady, consistent, present in every corner of daily life. She moves without spectacle, her strength revealed not through dramatic gestures, but through repetition, tasks done every morning, every noon, every dusk. She rarely stands in the center of a story, yet she is the one who keeps the story moving. Her silence is not emptiness, it is a form of endurance. Her calm is not resignation, it is the understanding that life flows best when matched with patient hands. She belongs to the fields, the loom, the hearth, and the small paths that connect one home to another. Her presence holds the village together, not through words, but through the steady continuity of her actions. In her quiet way, she embodies the slow heartbeat of her world. And so the story settles just as she settles into her place by the fading fire. The movements of her day unwind into stillness. The night folds gently around her. The breath of the medieval world grows slow and deep. Within that softness, the story closes, not with finality, but with the familiar rhythm of something that will begin again tomorrow, just as it always has.